I'm going to give you something else to talk about. And I've mentioned the story of Thanksgiving before on podcasts, but it's a really good story. And any good story is worth telling over and over again, especially since I probably tell it slightly differently each time because I don't actually have a script. But it's something that I would encourage everybody else to bring up at the dinner table as part of the conversation. Kind of like if you're Jewish and you know the story of Passover that you say at a Seder, the Exodus and Moses and everybody leaving the Egyptians. I think it's kind of like that because it's kind of like a dinner. But a lot of people don't really know the history of Thanksgiving and the lesson that it tells. And it's a good one. So I'm going to tell it again because Thanksgiving really is a celebration of capitalism. That's what's going on. It was the celebration of a bountiful harvest that followed several years of basically starvation and scarcity at the early, Pilgrims where they first landed. They all came across from England. These were Puritans, pretty religious group of people came across. They journeyed across the Atlantic Ocean to get to the Plymouth colony. The journey took over 2 months. Imagine being on a boat, for 2 months, not like a pleasure yacht like we got now, but 1620 wooden ship, coming across for a couple of months. Imagine the conditions that you would have to endure to make a journey like that. But anyway, about a little over 100 people made it. And, when they first got here, they were very idealistic. And so they decided that they were all going to work together in a communal effort to farm and grow food, right? They didn't want any one pilgrim to get rich. The whole idea was everybody would contribute to the best of their ability, and then everybody would have an equal ability to draw from the communal harvest, right? Everybody would just go out and farm and put whatever they grew into this communal pot, and everybody would just take what they needed. Now, remember, this was hundreds of years before Karl Marx came up with the idiotic concept from each according to his ability to each according to his need, right? That's the basic tenet of communism, right? Everybody just does what they can and then takes what they need, right? Nobody, is above anybody else. Well, he wasn't the originator of that. I mean, here you have, hundreds of years earlier, the Pilgrims tried an experiment that failed miserably in Marxism. You'd think maybe Karl Marx, if he knew anything about American history, might have realized that the whole premise of his book, Das Kapital and everything he did was already completely disproven by the Pilgrims. And of course, Bernie Sanders and AOC and everybody else who wants to, regurgitate this nonsense needs to spend a little time listening or studying history, because what happened was, so all the Pilgrims come in here and they're all going to work collectively for the good of everybody. And what happened was there was widespread famine and starvation, and half of them died. Like 50 of the 100 died during the first couple of years, mainly for lack of food. It wasn't, just the elements. And the problem was that people didn't want to work hard when they didn't benefit any more than the slackers. And of course, there was a big incentive to be a slacker, because why work hard when you're not going to get any extra food? Why spend your day toiling in the fields when you're going to get the same amount of food as the people who don't do any work at all? And so, a lot of the Pilgrims, they were just sick every day. I can't work. I don't feel good. My back hurts. So people would come up with one excuse after another not to work because they knew that somebody else would do the work. And then again, it wasn't just the farming, it was the cooking. But, some of the women, they didn't want to cook, for the other family or, somebody else's husband. There was, so nobody did anything. And, for the people who think socialism could work, you're talking about a group of people, very homogeneous. that came here on a mission, very religious, right? Very devout. They were really committed to this success of this new colony. Yet when they were put in a situation of socialism or Marxism, when it was, hey, let's all just work for the benefit of society, it didn't even work. If socialism, right, didn't work, or Marxism, what do you want to call it, with the Pilgrims, how could it possibly work with any other group of people? This is a small group, right? All committed to the same goals, the same ideals, yet they nearly starved to death because nobody wanted to work when the benefit of their work was going to be shared equally by everybody. Everybody was greedy in that sense, right? And so the whole thing fell apart, and they almost starved to death. And what saved the colony is they finally decided, they learned from their mistakes, which is, that is rare because modern day socialists never learned from their mistakes or anybody else's, right? Because if they had learned from the mistakes, they would have learned from the mistakes of the Pilgrims, right? So what happened was they finally decided, you know what, this ain't working. So let's divvy up all the land, and each Pilgrim, will have their own little parcel, right? Each, maybe a family, maybe it was a husband and wife, but each family unit got their own area to farm. So instead of having one big collective farm, everybody had their own. And the new rules were you eat what you grow, and you could trade what you grow, right? What you grow belongs to you, and nobody else gets to share it. And the minute they did that, everybody went to work, right? All the people that were calling in sick, suddenly they weren't sick anymore. Everybody worked as hard as they could when they were able to benefit and enjoy the fruits of their own labor, right? And once people realized that they couldn't slack off and leech on somebody else, they realized that, if I don't farm, I starve. Everybody farmed. And so people had an incentive to work hard and be productive. And you know what? They were so productive. They had a bountiful harvest under capitalism. People were growing a lot of food. They were trading with each other. They started trading with the Indians, right? Because they had so much, right? In socialism, they had nothing. They had famine and starvation. But under capitalism, they became so productive that they had extra. They produced more food than they could consume. So they had a surplus that they could trade, and they started trading with the Native Americans. And eventually we had the first Thanksgiving feast. But the reality is it was nothing but famine when they were a Marxist society. And as great as that all sounds, like, hey, let's all work for a common goal. Human nature just doesn't work that way. No matter how great, socialism, Marxism may sound in theory. Yes, in this ideal world where everybody is just altruistic and we just all work for the common good, it'll be great, right? And in theory, sure, yeah, that sounds, wonderful. But in practice, it never works because humans don't operate that way, right? It doesn't matter what you want to conceive theoretically could happen. Human nature hasn't changed. It hasn't changed at all since 1620. I mean, in fact, it hasn't changed since long before then. Doesn't matter how much more technology we have today than we had then. Basic human desires and the way we're wired, the way we operate, that hasn't changed, right? And we're not going to work as hard for society as we will for ourselves. And people will always try to take advantage of the fact if they're going to be rewarded without having to work, they won't work. They'll make up excuses. You wake up one morning, you don't feel like going to work. You know what? I'm not going to work. Why should I? I'm not going to get any extra. Why? I don't feel good. I have a sore back. But when you're getting the reward, then you find the stamina to persevere and show up. And that's the entrepreneur I've talked about, the unsung hero of the American economy. When people are building their own business, right? They will break their back. They will work 16-hour days. They will work 7 days a week. I know because I did that myself when I started my business. And I know a lot of other people who have done that. Nobody is going to do that if it's business. And if you're just working for the government, you're going to do as little work as you possibly can get away with. That is human nature. Those are incentives. And the Marxists never can come to terms with human nature and incentives and how they work. And the government still doesn't understand how they incentivize people not to work, not to be productive through the regulations and the programs that they pass. They always come up with these ideas that they conceive and they think they're going to help people, and they forget to understand how people are going to take advantage of everything that they do. That's how I knew that those PPP loans were going to be a complete disaster. You could say, sure, they were well-intentioned. We're just going to take care of people who really need help during the pandemic. Well, all of a sudden, a lot of people who didn't actually need help wanted it. They applied for it. They got it. And part of it was you felt like a sucker if you didn't take it, because everybody else is going to take it. Your neighbor is taking it. So I might as well take it too. Otherwise, I'm just a patsy, right? And that's how a lot of the Pilgrims felt. Why should I work? What's in it for me, right? Well, that capitalism solves that problem. What's in it for you? You get what you produce. You own what you produce. You decide. You can consume it. You could trade it. And if you don't work, you get nothing. And that is a motivator. Right? A lot of people, if they have the option, that's why, you have this universal basic income. People think, oh, they're going to work if they get universal basic income. No, they won't. They'll use that as an excuse not to work. Why should they? You want to make sure somebody works? Well, if you don't work, you don't eat, right? You don't have a place to live. So get off your ass and start working. And people will. People will respond to that motivation. Now, again, that doesn't mean that I'm heartless and I'm going to say, hey, if you can't work, you're just going to starve to death. That's what they have private charity for. But the benefit of private charity is now people will help people that they recognize are in circumstances where they can't help themselves. But if you see an able-bodied guy who's not even trying, and the guy can go out and work, why are you going to give that guy charity? All you're going to do is encourage his bad actions, right? But yeah, when you see somebody and their circumstances are such that you can understand that they need a little help, people will voluntarily help their fellow man. But that's not what government does, right? Government takes money by force and then perpetuates the idea of people not having to work. But all that can be boiled down to the Pilgrims and Thanksgiving. So I think it's a great story of capitalism to tell the real story of Thanksgiving and why there is a Thanksgiving. Because if the socialists had stuck to their original plan, there'd be no America. They all would have died. The rest of the 50 or whoever came, everybody would have perished, and there would be no the United States if we had followed the Marxist playbook hundreds of years before Karl Marx himself even came up with it.